The night she said it, the city was already quiet. Brooklyn after 11, muted traffic, a few sirens cutting through the fog, the hum of the refrigerator filling the apartment like an accusation. Noah stood by the counter with a dish towel in his hand, watching Elise scroll through her phone, her face illuminated in the pale blue light. She didn't look up when she said the words. "You'll never be part of their lives." Not shouted, not even cruelly delivered, just stated, like a calendar update. There meant the twins, of course, but also something larger. Her audience. The ones who sent her free baby monitors and commented "You're so strong" beneath filtered photos of exhaustion made aesthetic. For a long moment, Noah thought he had misheard. He had grown used to being edited mid-sentence, cropped out of frames, tagged only in the caption when brand deals required dad perspective. But this was deletion in its purest form. He folded the towel, placed it on the counter, and walked to the living room. Their once shared space looked staged, beige throws, soft lighting, a vase of eucalyptus for texture. Everything curated for her feed. His sketchbooks were stacked neatly under the coffee table, unseen artifacts of the person he used to be. He knelt, opened one, and ran his fingers over graphite smudges, renderings of the nursery before it became a set piece, blueprints for the house they'd once planned to renovate together. Each drawing carried a timestamp, proof that he'd been building something long before her followers learned to spell resilience. He moved quietly. The twins were asleep, tiny shadows behind their white noise machine. He didn't want to wake them. He didn't want them to see him as the sound of leaving. He packed a single suitcase, clothes, laptop, a few tools he couldn't bear to abandon. His hand trembled when he unplugged his hard drive. Years of project drafts, invoices, and something else. A folder labeled Clinic. He opened it, the cursor blinking like a pulse. Inside, scanned consent forms, payment receipts, a PDF of embryo records from the IVF cycle. His name appeared beside hers, identical signatures, dated before the sponsorships, before the narrative pivot to solo motherhood. For a moment, anger threatened to lift his hand, to make him drag the folder into the open and confront her. But the years had taught him that confrontation only fueled her next post. Proof of endurance, another villain to outgrow. Instead, he copied everything to an external drive, tucked it into the lining of his bag, and zipped it shut. When he finally spoke, it was to the empty room. "All right," he murmured, the words thin, more exhale than sound. At the door, he paused. The digital clock above the oven glowed 12:04. Elise had retreated to the bedroom, the faint click of her laptop keys still audible, drafting, editing, rehearsing her next caption. He looked once toward the twins' door, where a sliver of nightlight painted a soft gold line across the floor. He pressed his palm against it, not to say goodbye, but to make a quiet promise. "I'll stay, even if not here." Outside, the air carried the cold, metallic scent of rain. Noah stepped into it, suitcase in one hand, sketchbooks in the other. He didn't slam the door. He let it close on its own, slow and deliberate, like the end of a long recording. Down on the street, he could see their apartment window glowing faintly above. He imagined Elise there, adjusting the brightness of a post, cropping a frame, erasing shadows. And somewhere, among her drafts, she was already rewriting this night. Perhaps as his abandonment, perhaps as her strength. He tightened his grip on the handle of his bag. For the first time in months, there was no lens between him and the world, only the streetlights, the weight of truth in his pocket drive, and a silence that, despite everything, felt almost like freedom. In the weeks that followed, Elise's world bloomed online as Noah's dimmed into the background hum of borrowed spaces. Her posts, sunlit kitchens, toddlers in matching linen, captions about rebuilding, circulated across parenting accounts like Scripture. Healing after heartbreak, one headline read on a lifestyle blog that repurposed her story. The photos looked effortless, the twins playing under a banner that read New Beginnings, Elise in neutral tones, face turned to the light, the visible trace of fatigue framed as grace. Noah saw it first through friends' reposts. He wasn't looking for her, but she was everywhere, suggested, tagged, algorithmically ordained. The comments section formed a kind of chorus. So proud of you. You're proof we can rise. Not a single word about him. He scrolled once, twice, then closed the app. He was sleeping on Marcus's couch in a one-bedroom walk-up in Crown Heights. The couch dipped in the middle, smelled faintly of takeout and detergent. Each morning, before Marcus left for work, Noah folded his blanket, made the couch neat, and opened his laptop at the kitchen table. The only steady work he'd found was a contract designing adaptive spaces for a community center, ramps, handrails, sensory corners for children with autism. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. The drawings were simple, clean, human. For the first time in a long while, he was building for people who didn't perform being seen. Still, the nights pressed heavy. At 8:30, he'd check his phone, waiting for the brief window when Elise might let him FaceTime the twins. Sometimes the call went unanswered. Sometimes she texted, "They're asleep already," followed by a photo of them in matching pajamas. Other times, nothing at all. He began to keep a small notebook by the bed, a ledger of absence. Each page bore a date, a brief note. April 12th, no call. April 14th, denied visit, too disruptive to routine. The handwriting stayed neat, almost architectural, as if control could be drawn into being. He didn't show the notebook to anyone. Marcus noticed the sleeplessness but didn't pry. The city outside was loud with the early heat of summer, sirens, laughter, the rhythmic clatter of someone's upstairs treadmill. But Noah's world contracted to the square footage of that couch, the flicker of his screen, the quiet discipline of not collapsing. Sometimes he'd watch Elise's stories on mute. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to stay tethered to proof the twins were real, still growing, still laughing, even if through someone else's choreography. But the performances cut deeper than any silence. In one video, Elise lifted a child onto her hip and whispered, "It's just us now." The camera panned to the window, sunlight haloing their faces, and Noah felt the breath leave his body. It was the kind of beauty that could convince strangers of anything. He turned off his phone and went outside. The city's heat smelled like garbage and wet asphalt, but it was real. He walked past bodegas closing for the night, past murals fading into graffiti. His reflection followed him in darkened storefronts, tired, thinner, but present. When he returned to the apartment, Marcus was asleep. The living room glowed faintly from the streetlights. Noah sat at the table again, opened his notebook, and wrote one line beneath the day's date. "I wasn't absent. I was refused." Then he closed it carefully, slid it under his pillow like a document waiting for court, and lay back down. In the silence, he pictured his children somewhere across the river, dreaming under the same sky. He knew she was winning the narrative. But narratives, he reminded himself, required an audience. Lives did not. It started with a number that didn't add up. A polite email from a billing department Noah barely remembered. Subject line, Account Reconciliation, IVF Cycle 2020. He almost deleted it. But the wording caught him. Joint consent required for refund release. Joint. His name was still on record. He opened the attachment while waiting for a train at Franklin Avenue, the roar of the approaching cars dissolving into the static of his own pulse. The PDF loaded slowly on his phone. Itemized charges, storage fees, signatures. There, beneath Elise's precise cursive, was his own. Date stamped, notarized, the legal confirmation that he had agreed to every part of the process that had led to the twins. The embryo transfers, the retrieval schedules, the clinic visits he'd left early to make client meetings, the morning he'd brought her tea afterward. All of it had happened. All of it had included him. He sat down on the metal bench, commuters flowing around him like water. A woman nearby balanced a toddler on her hip. The child pointed at the pigeons and laughed. The sound struck something deep and unguarded in him. He scrolled further through the file. Emails, clinic notes, the signature of the attending doctor. Each line contradicted the story Elise had curated. The interviews, the posts about doing it alone, the soft-lit declarations that she had been the only one ready for motherhood. He remembered the night she first floated that version of the story, months before the separation. They'd been sitting on the couch, the twins asleep, her laptop open to a brand proposal. "It's about honesty," she'd said, without irony. "About telling women it's okay to want this on their own." Noah had laughed gently. "But you didn't," he said. "We did it together." She'd smiled the way she did when a negotiation was already over. "It's a narrative, Noah. People connect to the truth they need." Now, in the sterile hum of the subway platform, that phrase tasted poisonous. He opened the Notes app on his phone and began typing. Dates, clinic addresses, the billing contact. He wasn't sure yet what he'd do with it, only that he couldn't let it dissolve into her version of events. For every truth she published, there had to be a record, something that couldn't be cropped or captioned. That night, back on Marcus's couch, he printed the report at the community center's copier, the machine wheezing with each page. The paper came out warm, faintly smelling of toner. He spread the sheets on the table, tracing his finger along the signatures. Proof not of ownership, but of presence. Proof that he had been there, in the waiting rooms, in the mornings of injections, in the quiet reassurance of "we're almost there." When Marcus came home, he found Noah staring at the papers, motionless. "You okay?" he asked. Noah didn't look up. "She told everyone I wasn't ready to be a father," he said, voice flat, almost disbelieving. "But she tested that line before she ever said it to me, like an ad campaign." Marcus frowned, glanced at the documents. "What are you going to do with them?" "I don't know yet," Noah said. "But I'm done being deleted." Later, alone, he gathered the papers into a manila folder and labeled it with one clean word: record. He slipped it into his duffel beside the hard drive and the notebook of missed visits. The folder felt heavier than its weight, like it carried not just proof but permission, to stop doubting his memory, to claim his own narrative, even if no one believed it yet. Outside, the city buzzed with its indifferent rhythm, sirens, traffic, laughter from a rooftop bar. Noah sat by the window, the skyline flickering through glass streaked with rain, and understood something Elise never would. Truth didn't need to trend. It only needed to last. The mediation office smelled of coffee and air freshener, a neutral scent meant to suggest calm. Neutral walls, neutral lighting, a glass carafe of water between them like a peace offering neither intended to accept. Elise sat opposite Noah in a cream blazer that matched her online aesthetic, restraint dressed as virtue. Her expression was steady, practiced. She had always been composed under scrutiny. The camera had trained her to be. Noah sat with a pen in his hand, not to sign yet, just to have something to hold. His palms still remembered the weight of the sketches he used to show her, the ones she never shared. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with patient eyes, began with the same line Noah had heard in every legal conversation since this started. "We're here to find common ground." Elise smiled politely, like someone preparing for a brand interview. "I want what's best for the children," she said. "And I think that means stability, narrative stability." The phrase landed like a glitch in an otherwise human sentence. Noah glanced up. Narrative stability? Elise folded her hands. "They're recognizable, Noah. People follow their story. The transition has to be managed." She reached into her folder, slid across a document. "These are the proposed terms." He scanned the first page. Non-disclosure agreement. Clause 7, Party B, Noah Mercer, shall refrain from public discussion, written or verbal, that contradicts or damages the established narrative of single motherhood associated with Party A, Elise Hart. His chest tightened, but he kept his face still. There were paragraphs about brand integrity, emotional consistency, and shared messaging. At the bottom, her lawyer's name gleamed in blue ink. "So," he said finally, "you want me to disappear quietly, again." Elise sighed, soft but audible. "I want peace. This isn't about you. It's about protecting the children from confusion." Noah looked at the mediator, who was writing something down, perhaps the word confusion. Then he looked back at Elise. "You mean protecting the brand?" Her composure flickered, the smallest tremor in the jaw. "Don't make this ugly." He placed the pen flat on the table, aligning it with the edge of the folder. "I'm not here to make anything ugly. I just want the truth, on record." The mediator cleared her throat. "Mr. Mercer, do you have counterterms?" He nodded, reached into his bag, and handed over a single typed page. 3 items. 1. Joint custody. Equal legal and physical time. No manipulation of schedules for publicity or content creation. 2. No monetization of the children. Their images, voices, or likenesses not to be used for profit or promotion. 3. Public correction. A short statement acknowledging that both parents consented to and participated in the IVF process. Elise read it quickly, a small, incredulous laugh breaking the silence. "You're asking me to correct a feeling, Noah. People don't care about paperwork. They connect to authenticity." "Then be authentic," he said quietly. The mediator tried to soften the air between them. "Perhaps there's middle ground." "No," Noah interrupted, calm but resolute. "Either I'm their father, or I'm content. I can't be both, not, under her rules." Elise leaned back, crossing her arms. "You're being vindictive." He shook his head. "No, I'm being specific." For a moment they both fell silent. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Outside, through the blinds, the city pulsed with its own rhythm. Traffic, voices, the anonymous machinery of a life still going on. Elise looked down at her nails, perfectly manicured, and whispered, almost to herself, "You don't understand what it's like to be watched." Noah studied her face, the exhaustion beneath the polish, the tremor she tried to suppress. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't, but I understand what it's like to be erased." The mediator called for a break. Elise stood, phone already in hand, scrolling, retreating into the light she could still control. Noah stayed seated. He turned the pen in his fingers, feeling its small weight, the gravity of what he had just said. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet clarity. He didn't want to win. He wanted to end the performance. When Elise returned, her voice was even, but her eyes had lost some of their distance. "Joint custody," she said, measured. "We'll discuss logistics, but I won't issue a public apology." "Then a correction," he replied. "One line, no spectacle." She hesitated, and for the first time he saw uncertainty flicker, something human, unfiltered. "You think that will change anything?" He gathered his papers. "It will change me." As he left the office, the glass door reflected their silhouettes for an instant. Two figures framed by fluorescent light, like actors frozen between scenes. Outside, the afternoon was gray and clean. Noah exhaled, his breath clouding briefly in the cold, and thought, "Let the story fall apart. Let the truth breathe on its own." It began like every other minor storm on the internet. An anonymous account, a handful of screenshots, a caption that started with, "So I used to work for her." Within hours, the thread had spread across platforms. Elise's name trended, not under #resilience, but scripted motherhood. The screenshots showed her content calendar, color-coded posts, planned captions, photo concepts. At first it looked ordinary until people noticed the dates. The same weekends she had denied Noah's visitation were marked with scheduled solo parenting campaigns. "Weekend without help," one post had been captioned, "Just me and my babies against the noise." The timestamps aligned too perfectly. What had once looked like strength now read as strategy. When Noah saw it, he didn't feel vindicated, just tired. He was in the middle of measuring drywall at the community center when Marcus slid him the phone, muttering, "You're gonna want to see this." Noah scrolled silently, thumb steady, face unreadable. By evening, brand sponsors began to issue statements, partnerships under review, while parenting influencers who once called her a lighthouse deleted old collaborations. Across the river, Elise sat in her office surrounded by the debris of her own creation. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Emails from PR, messages from her manager, texts from women she thought were friends. She scrolled through the comments, numb at first, then dizzy. People dissected her tone, her timing, her sincerity. Was any of it real? They asked. Did she exploit her kids? For the first time, she had no language ready. The polished captions she had once crafted with precision now felt like artifacts from a stranger's life. Her reflection in the laptop screen looked unfamiliar, too pale, too still. She remembered her mother's voice, the one that filled every childhood morning. Stand up straight. Don't let anyone see you falter. Her mother had ironed the same smile into every photo, kept a spotless house even when the family was falling apart. Elise had inherited that discipline like a genetic code, performance as protection. Now, sitting in the sterile light of her own office, she realized how much of her life had been lived for the angle, not the moment. Every milestone planned for shareability, every hurt repackaged before it could sting. She had called it resilience, but what it really was, what it had always been, was fear. Her manager called again. "We need a statement," he said. "Own it. Control the narrative before it controls you." Elise looked at the empty playroom behind her, the twins' toys untouched since the last photo shoot. The silence of the apartment pressed in. For once, she didn't want to control anything. "No statement," she said softly, and hung up. She walked into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and splashed water over her face. The woman in the mirror looked exhausted. No filters could soften the truth. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone again, scrolling back to the oldest videos, the early days when Noah still appeared in the background, his laugh faint, genuine. The memory hit her with a physical ache. She thought of the mediation room, his calm voice asking for truth, not spectacle. "Then be authentic," he had said, and she had dismissed it as moral theater. But now, as the scaffolding of her brand collapsed around her, the words lodged in her chest like a shard of glass. That night, she opened her laptop, not to post, but to look, really look, at what she had built. Hundreds of drafts, saved captions, images of herself smiling beside her children. She realized she couldn't remember half the moments beyond the lens. What they smelled like, what they said afterward, who they were becoming. When the twins woke and wandered sleepily into her room, she didn't reach for her phone. She pulled them close instead, feeling their weight, their warmth, their unfiltered life. The little girl whispered, "Mommy, why are you sad?" Elise shook her head, pressing a kiss into her daughter's hair. "I'm just remembering," she said. Across the city, Noah sat by the window of Marcus's apartment, watching headlines roll by. He could have joined the noise, defended himself, corrected the record in full. But something in him resisted. The truth was finally breathing on its own. It didn't need his voice to survive. He opened his notebook, found the page where he had once written to "I wasn't absent. I was refused." And beneath it, he added one more line. "She's learning what that means, too." And then he closed it, letting the silence settle. Not victory, not revenge, just the slow, fragile sound of balance returning to two separate lives. Family court was colder than Noah expected. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening everyone into the same shade of gray. The tables were scarred from decades of hands and documents and arguments, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. He sat at one end with his lawyer, a quiet woman named Caldwell, who had warned him not to expect catharsis. "Just facts, Mr. Mercer. The law doesn't deal in feelings." Elise sat opposite, immaculate as ever. She wore navy, her hair pulled back, her face stripped of the glow that had once made her camera ready. But the poise remained, the stillness of someone who had learned how to perform composure under pressure. Her lawyer shuffled papers, adjusting binders with the precision of someone who believed order could win arguments. When the judge entered, everyone rose. A woman in her 60s with calm eyes and a reputation for patience, she took her seat and began without preamble. "We're here to address custody and the claims of misrepresentation raised by Mr. Mercer." Her tone was even, clipped, as if she'd heard every permutation of human disappointment before. Caldwell began with what they had. Nothing dramatic, just a chronology. Emails, clinic invoices, the consent forms with both signatures, the storage bills paid from their joint account. Noah's logbook was next, its pages photocopied and stapled into evidence. Each line a date. Each date a small wound reopened. The missed calls, the denied weekends, the responses labeled disruptive to content planning. Elise's side countered with her brand documents, contracts, PR correspondence, an argument that her narrative voice had been misunderstood as literal truth. These were metaphors, her lawyer said, almost pleading. She was expressing emotional truth, not factual events. The judge raised a hand. Emotional truth does not negate factual responsibility. Then came the moment that would fix itself in Noah's memory forever. Caldwell projected the clinic's digital record onto the screen. Time-stamped entries of each visit, embryo transfer notes, the day the twins were conceived. Then she opened a second file, Elise's posts, archived and dated. On one screen, the medical record. June 3, 2020, embryo transfer completed, both parties present. On the other, Elise's post from Pau, the same day, a photo of her alone in the clinic chair, captioned, "Doing this on my own." Some journeys are meant to be walked without company. A silence fell so complete it seemed to absorb sound. Even the court clerk stopped typing. The judge leaned forward, reading each line, then looked at Elise. "Ms. Hart," she said slowly, "these timestamps align. You were not alone." Elise's hands tightened on the table. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. The composure that had carried her through interviews and sponsorship deals began to crack in real time. Caldwell spoke softly, not gloating, just clarifying. "Your Honor, these records demonstrate a pattern, not a misunderstanding, but deliberate misrepresentation, a narrative designed to erase the father's presence for public consumption." The judge nodded. "I see that." She turned to Elise. "Was there a reason for this portrayal?" Elise's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Noah for the first time, not through the filter of litigation, but as someone seeing the human consequence of her choices. Her lips trembled. "I thought it would make the story stronger," she said finally, voice thin as paper. "It wasn't supposed to." "To what?" the judge asked gently. "To hurt him." Noah's throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, but the evidence glared between them, unflinching. The judge sat back, folding her hands. "Intent can be dressed in many forms, but what matters here is impact. This was not a mistake. It was strategy, and it harmed the children's relationship with their father." Elise's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just stared at the screen where her own curated truth now looked like evidence of something colder than dishonesty: calculation. When the hearing ended, the judge announced her decision. Joint custody granted, the children's likeness protected from monetization, both parents ordered to attend co-parenting counseling. She added, almost as an afterthought, but with weight that filled the room, "And I expect the public record to reflect the factual parentage of these children. The court will not participate in fiction." Outside, the winter light was harsh and clean. Reporters waited down the steps, but Noah didn't stop. He walked past them, past the cameras, the noise, the endless hunger for narrative. At the curb, he paused, closing his coat against the wind. In his pocket, his phone buzzed. Marcus texting, "You did it?" Noah didn't answer. He wasn't sure what it was anymore. All he knew was that something true had finally been spoken in a room where truth usually came last. Behind him, Elise emerged, head down, escorted by her lawyer. For a fleeting second, their reflections crossed in the courthouse glass. Two versions of a story that had finally run out of lies. He turned away first, not out of anger, but out of mercy. The order came in the mail on a gray morning, thick with the smell of rain. Noah read it standing by the window of his small apartment. The court's letterhead, the dense paragraphs, the final line that mattered most: joint custody awarded. The words didn't feel like victory, only relief, as if someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been sealed too long. He exhaled slowly. The city outside was waking. Buses sighing at corners, children in raincoats rushing toward crosswalks, parents hurrying behind them. He thought of the twins, of how their hands would fit inside his, of how much time had been stolen under the guise of narrative. He promised himself quietly that his version of fatherhood would have no audience, just presence. A week later, they met again in the mediation office to finalize logistics. The same bland decor, the same carafe of water that no one touched. Elise looked smaller this time, not physically, but in the way her confidence seemed to fit looser, as though she'd outgrown it without knowing what came next. Her eyes carried the dull sheen of someone who had been performing damage control for weeks and had run out of words to explain herself. Noah laid his conditions on the table. No filming or photographing the twins for monetized content, a shared calendar for custody schedules, and a brief public note correcting the record. Nothing humiliating, nothing dramatic. Just a factual acknowledgement that both parents had participated in the children's conception and upbringing. "It's not about apology," he said evenly. "It's about accuracy." Elise nodded, her voice quiet. "I'll post it. A joint statement if you want." "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "It should come from you." There was a long silence. The rain ticked against the window. She shifted in her chair, staring at the papers before her, then looked up again. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that maybe we could try again? Without all the noise, I mean." Her voice cracked around the words, almost shy. "We were good before all this, weren't we?" Noah studied her face. The exhaustion, the apology forming behind her composure, the soft edge of longing. Part of him wanted to remember that good she spoke of, but memory, when it came, carried too much distortion. The filtered photos, the practiced smiles, the quiet edits that had rewritten his life in real time. "We were hopeful," he said. "That's not the same as good." She looked down, the smallest of nods. "I don't know who I am without the performance," she admitted. "I thought I was protecting all of us by keeping control." "Control isn't the same as care," he said. "Sometimes it's the opposite." They sat in silence for a while. The mediator had stepped out, leaving them with the sound of rain and a single ticking clock. It wasn't hostility that lingered between them now, but a strange kind of tenderness, the kind that follows the end of something once important. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "Then what do you want from me now?" He closed the folder, aligning the pages neatly. "Honesty. For them. For you, if you can manage it. That's all." She swallowed, eyes shining. "No second chance?" He shook his head. "Not that kind. A gate, not a bridge. We can meet there, for the kids, but we don't cross back over." Tears came then, quiet ones. the kind she wouldn't have allowed on camera. He didn't move to comfort her. He just waited, giving her space to be uncurated. When she finally gathered her things, she said softly, "You were always calmer than I deserved." "No," he answered, "just tired of being a lesson in someone else's story." They left the office separately. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming. Noah stood for a moment beneath the awning, watching the sky lighten over the East River. Somewhere across the city, his children would be waking soon. He imagined them padding across hardwood floors, the soft thump of small feet. For the first time in years, the thought didn't ache. It steadied him. He walked toward the subway, the custody order folded carefully in his jacket pocket, feeling the quiet weight of something real. Not triumph, not love reborn, but a balance restored. The bridge had burned clean. What remained was a gate, small, practical, unglamorous, opening toward a life that didn't need to be watched to be true. By autumn, the noise had finally quieted. The feeds that once carried Elisa's face every morning, perfect light, curated resilience, had gone still. The comments slowed, then stopped. The sponsorships that had paused never resumed. For the first time in years, she didn't owe anyone a story. She kept her phone on silent now, not out of discipline, but fatigue. The panels she used to headline went on without her. New voices filled the circuits. Newer faces inherited the glow. She declined interviews, ignored podcast invitations titled Reclaiming Authenticity, and let the attention drift elsewhere. Her apartment, once a stage, began to feel like a place again, quiet, a little bare. She repainted the walls herself unevenly, the brushstrokes visible. Imperfection was finally allowed to stay visible. The twins filled the silence. They had questions sometimes. Why people had taken so many pictures of them. Why some of their old toys had logos on them. Elise didn't have neat answers. She told them she'd made mistakes, that she'd confused love with performance. They didn't fully understand, but they understood enough to hug her anyway. At night, after they were asleep, she sat at the dining table with pen and paper and began writing letters. Not drafts, not captions. Just apologies, addressed to no one public. One to Noah, though she didn't send it. One to her children. One to her mother. One to the younger self who thought perfection could be armor. The words were clumsy and raw, but for once they weren't optimized for clarity or reach. They were just true. Across the river, Noah's life settled into something quieter, denser. The community center contract turned permanent. He taught design workshops to teenagers who built models out of cardboard and hope. His days had rhythm again. Morning coffee, subway sketches, the soft chaos of pickup time. Every other week, the twins stayed with him in his modest apartment. They drew on his drafting table, built pillow forts, spilled juice on blueprints he no longer minded losing. Bedtime was the best part. He read to them, his voice low, steady. Sometimes they fell asleep before the story ended, their small bodies warm against his side. He'd stay there, holding the book open in silence, feeling a stillness he hadn't known in years. Not triumph, not redemption, just presence. Elise began to visit the community center on her off days. At first it was practical, dropping off art supplies, volunteering for events. But gradually, it became something like repair. She and Noah didn't talk about the past much. They talked about the twins, about schedules, about small things that didn't break the air. The bitterness between them had thinned into something almost tender, the shared understanding of two people who had outlived a story. One evening, as they waited for the twins to finish painting, Elise turned to him. "You were right," she said quietly. "It's easier to breathe when no one's watching." Noah smiled, not cruelly. "Told you the quiet wasn't empty." They both looked out toward the playground. The twins were laughing, their voices rising over the hum of the city. Elise's eyes softened. "They're starting to remember you being there," she said. "Not just in photos, in real time." "That's all I wanted," he said. When the children ran to them, streaked with paint and joy, Noah knelt, wiping a smudge from his daughter's cheek. The light of early evening cut through the window, pale gold and ordinary. It was enough. Later, walking home, he passed by a cafe where once he'd sat reading Elise's interviews, dissecting every word for proof of betrayal. Now the screen above the counter played someone else's face, another life pretending at truth. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. He reached his block as the sky deepened into blue, the air cool and clean. In the quiet, he thought of all the noise they had survived. Applause, anger, headlines, silence, and how it had stripped them down to something smaller but enduring. Not a bridge back to what was lost, but a gate into what remained. Children who laughed freely, work that meant something, a peace that didn't require witnesses. For the first time, the story didn't need to be told. It simply held.